Hi, welcome back to CS170. So we're in week 13. So we're continuing on. We're talking about passwords right now, a couple of other challenges in terms of technology. So these are some topics that you've probably heard about, and we'll just kind of hit on these a little bit. So one of them is about passwords, right, and security, right? So I think probably longer term, passwords will be replaced by something else. It will kind of go away. You kind of see that a little bit already. But for now, passwords are still kind of prevalent. And so there's challenges with that. You make things too easy, then people can kind of guess it. You make it too hard, and people tend to write those passwords down on a piece of paper, which is also not good. Um, and it's like I said, it's a number of challenges, and there's different things where this is kind of evolving. And so longer term, passwords may not be the best way that we use for securing something, our accounts and whatnot, our financial transactions. So there's these couple of videos here, which I will leave you to kind of watch on your own, talking about choosing passwords, talking about security of your passwords. And then here's this other point about two-factor authentication. So for a lot of you, probably, especially if you have a mobile phone, but even if you just have an email account, you probably see a lot of this already. So a lot of notably around financial transactions, but probably other things too, where people will have to kind of go through like a two-step process where, let's say I sign on with my password on whatever website, and then they'll send you like a text, or they'll send something to your email with a special code, and then you got to take that and put that in there, right? So let's assume your phone didn't get stolen or hacked. Or assume that your email didn't get like hacked. So it's supposed to provide this additional layer of security rather than just a password alone. So that's what two-factor authentication is. So that's something that's kind of common these days. And then, you probably see things on your phone related to like using biometric information, using your thumbprint, or your index fingerprint, I should say, and then doing things like facial recognition, retinal scan, and stuff like that. So there's a different couple different types of things that are coming along that will gradually, I think, ultimately replace passwords. But like I said, it's common enough now that you should be aware of that. Okay. Now, the other thing is like phishing attacks, right? So you have a lot of different types of security that you may put around something. Let's say you're a company, right? And you have like all these different things with your firewall and whatnot, right? But ultimately, the biggest weakness to getting into a system is the people, right? So you look at, if you ever see like interviews and see some of the things from different hackers, what are they really good at? They're good at basically getting information from people that allows them to get through the security. If there was no people involved and they just had to go right at quote unquote a secure system, it would be very difficult, right, for them to get through, right? But how do they ultimately get through? They basically get through by getting at someone, right, a person, right? Maybe identity theft, maybe getting into, convincing them to give you certain bits of information, right? So you might have people kind of, tricking you into giving up, certain key bits of information that allows them to reset your password. Or impersonate you ultimately, right? And all they have to do is get their foot in the door in one account, and then they'll just kind of break through into all your other accounts. So, that's the idea of phishing attack. So you might get something in an email, right? Something attractive, like, oh, click on this and do whatever, right? Get a free something or other. or like click on this because someone has hacked your account. We need to reset your password. So click on this, right? Whatever it is, they somehow convince you to click on something. And then once you click on something, usually a lot of bad things happen, right? And either one, there's something that will be installed locally on your device that would just like suck everything out of your device and may even stick around and monitor your keystrokes and everything else that it can do off your phone, right? These days, your phone has like a lot of things that it can access for you. The other thing that you have is like, you click on this, it automatically opens up like something else, which will basically, again, interact with you and collect your information. Okay, so it could either be right there and then it's collecting your information, or it could leave something around on your device to collect information now and also keep on collecting information into the future. And it could do things like replicate itself across your whole network, right? So it's basically a whole bunch of bad things that can happen if you somehow get tricked into clicking on something, right? So that's what these phishing attacks are about. And most companies will run like tests, right? They'll send out fake phishing emails just to see which of their employees will click on them, right? And when you're talking about a company of thousands of people, even if you train people not to click on things, inevitably someone clicks on it, right? So you have thousands and thousands of employees. All it takes is one of them to click on it, and all hell breaks loose, right? So that's what's involved with these phishing attacks. Okay, and if you look at on Google and you do a search on phishing attacks, I'm sure you'll get a whole ton of different examples of past phishing attacks and basic examples of emails that people may send to you, which is essentially as a phishing attack. I won't spend too much time on it. We're trying to hit some of these other topics here. So there's another key point here, protecting intellectual property. And I believe the book spends a decent amount of time on this. I know for sure, we hit a couple of questions on the exam for this. So this is an important topic. So do make sure you understand this idea. I mean, it's not something that most people here, probably most of you understand what it means, protecting intellectual property, right? So if you're out there like downloading stuff, copying stuff, looking at stuff, quote unquote, for free or whatever, plagiarism, obviously, whatever it is, there's any number of things that I think most of us have a general idea of what intellectual property is and what it means to steal someone's intellectual property. But this is like formal definitions of it. So, this is what intellectual property is, the fact that it can be owned, and the different types of ownership of that intellectual property. Okay. So these are the two things that we kind of cover in this class, talking about software products and then copyrights of material on the web. Okay. So you have like probably you've seen a lot of this, or maybe it was like part of a long agreement. You just kind of click through to agree to it when you signed up for something. But you have this software license agreement, right? So in the old days, you used to buy something at the store or whatever. You would bring home, install it on your computer, and then there would like this be the software license agreement before you open up the package or something like that. Now, a lot of times the software license agreement is something that just kind of pops up as you register for something. It'll be like this very long bit of words where you're kind of signing away your life, and then you just click on it and you're agreeing to the terms of that software license agreement. Okay. So, and it's an interesting situation, right? Because sometimes, in the past, it was basically a software company writes all of this software and then sells it to you and you use it. And then it's pretty clear about the intellectual property, right? But what happens if you're creating intellectual property based on input from your customers? right? So based on your customers' input, you're making your product better. You're coming up with new ideas or whatnot. So this software license agreement, not only is it talking about like, well, whatever the company has created, but also what you may contribute into uh, the intellectual property of whatever it is that you're using, right? If you did something to make that better, let's say for the sake of argument that uh, Wikipedia was like a product that was being sold and whatever, and you contributed articles to it. So the way this will work is that, yeah, then whoever owns Wikipedia would be selling it based on the articles that everyone wrote, but no one else is going to get any money for it, right? It's sort of something like that. So, the software license agreement, the idea around that is also like kind of like one of those soft type of things that has some challenges there too. But let's just keep it simple. We're talking about purely like one company or individual kind of selling something. Okay. So typical company would be like Microsoft, Apple, something like that, right? So you have this, which is the individual use, which is like you use it for yourself, right? And then you have like the commercial use, which would be like, let's say you're a company and you're using this to sell your products, let's say, something like that, right? And then your ability to do distribution on it, and then sharing and copying, right? So maybe you're a company and you have a site license or something like that to use Microsoft Word, let's say. Microsoft Office probably more like. So that's what Rutgers has, right? So Rutgers would have a site license so that everybody at Rutgers could use it. It's not like they go and buy an individual license for every single student. They would basically have like a site license that's like an umbrella that covers everybody, right? And then, I guess with a lot of the software now being on the cloud, they have more control over that. So it's not quite like copying like it was in the old days. So they have a little bit more control about who can use and not use their software. So that on the technology side is also evolving. Okay. And then this last bit, open versus proprietary licenses. Okay. So, I think I mentioned in maybe 2 lectures ago, we were talking about stuff like open source, right? So we talked about Wikipedia, right? So that's where like people contributed articles and they do it for free and they don't make any money, stuff like that. I believe like Wikipedia asks you for a donation and stuff like that, but for the most part, they're not really selling anything. But probably more common that you might think about is some of like the operating system stuff like Linux and whatnot. So that is like something that is open source, so people can kind of get that, right? But then you remember I mentioned that people can build stuff on top of it, and then they can kind of create their own intellectual property on top of that. Maybe they add more security to it or something like that. That they can sell, right? So it's like a special version of Linux that someone else, came in on top of that. And then you have just straight up your, you came up with this software privately, and you're just gonna, do that for profit. So you're gonna have, a dedicated license for that. It's not for open source. Okay. And the example they gave here is Mozilla Firefox, right? If you're using that browser. Okay. So this goes more into what I was just saying, right? So proprietary software is like a company, they wrote it, right? Biggest example is something like Microsoft, right? So the source code is theirs, right? But you've actually even seen Microsoft, they've put some of their code out into open source too. But that's their choice, right? They certainly choose a lot to keep a lot of code internal to themselves. And then you have the open source software, right? So I was just talking about that down here. So these are the basically 2 key points here. proprietary software versus open source software. Okay. So these are just a couple of points that you may ask yourself, right? So open source, seems to not make sense, right? So who pays for the technology? And how does a company make money if the product's publicly available? And this is where I was kind of saying, the open source itself, that's kind of almost like the base layer. You kind of consider that as the free layer. And then, how a company can make money off of this is that they add customizations on top of that, right? The base layer still stays in common. They need to make sure they're compatible with that, but they build on top of it. So like I said, you could be a company that comes along with different things to be more security conscious. You kind of build more security on it. You make it more so that companies can adopt it. They call it like enterprise software, right? So a lot of times you see software is kind of more built for like a individual person to do some work at home, right? But when you start working on this, like as part of a large company, there's other considerations you have to, deal with in terms of scaling up. You have thousands of people using it, right? If you want to have like a document that you want multiple people to work on and share, there's like a lot of different things you have to think about that may not be part of the original open source, right? So a lot of people that are contributing to open source may be thinking about, the needs of an individual developer, let's say, working on something. So, so a company can come along and they add features to it off of this base layer, and that's how they make money. Okay, that's one way they can make money. So they asked the question, right? I'm not really sure anybody, off the top of your head would kind of know that, but I'm just giving you an example. That's how they make, how you could make money off of open source software. Okay. Let me see here. All right, let's try to get through this here. So I don't want to make this lecture too long, but let's see what we can do here. All right, so copyrights. Okay, so this is almost, you think about it like writing a book, but this is basically content on the web, right? So you think about like, oh, I publish XYZ novel or something like that. So in some ways, like when you look at the copyrights of like work that you've done, it kind of is based on that, right? So here, talking about term paper, which you could just paste onto a web page, create a sculpture, but you can also create some piece of art that's out there on the digital side, right? And then they own the copyright to that work, okay? So what does it protect, right? So it basically doesn't want you to make a copy of their work or make a derivative of that work. So what does that mean, create a derivative of that work? It could be like, oh, well, I drew like this, awesome painting or something like that, right? Like this artwork. And then someone came along and just added something to it. You can imagine like Mickey Mouse, right? So I have like the Mickey Mouse character, and then someone comes along and just like pretty much takes 99%, like the whole Mickey Mouse thing, and maybe puts me like in different clothes or something like that, right? Well, everyone knows that's just Mickey Mouse, but you just kind of added something to it, right? You can be sure as heck like Disney is going to sue the heck out of you, right? If you do something like that, right? So that's what they mean, like by creating a derivative work off of that. And of course, you can't just like take other people's stuff and distribute it and publish their work, right? And then in the case of like music or art, right, is publicly perform or display their work, okay? So on the web, you have these three concepts here that are in bold, right? So this is for you, right? If you want to look at something, read it, listen to it or whatever, that's for your own use, right? You're not making any money off of it or anything like that, right? And then here, fair use, you get some use of it, without like having to go back to the author and ask them for permissions, right? And a lot of times you'll see this in the academic space, right? So people are referring to other things, maybe to teach their class, maybe to write a paper or whatever, right? So generally you'll see fair use in this realm, like around universities or education and stuff like that, right? And then public domain, and you can do pretty much what you want with it. A lot of people kind of recognize it, and you can do whatever with it. And generally, if this is like for stuff that's been around for a long time, or the author explicitly put it out there and said, yeah, it's public domain or whatever, right? It's one of those things, usually more the former. Usually it's more like, this thing has been around for like 100 years or something like that. And it's free for people to use. Okay, so it's public domain. So like, those the old novels that you've read, right? All of that type of stuff is considered like, public domain, and everyone recognizes it. So there's another concept here called Creative Commons license. So this is something where, like the author is kind of being pretty open about it, right? Again, this is maybe something that you can look at it more in the academic space, right? So like if you're the author, you want people to kind of use it, right? And then maybe people can build on top of it, right? So in some ways, you can almost draw the analogy to like what people are doing within Wikipedia, okay? So they're trying to encourage people to contribute to it and work on it as a group, okay? So like it says here, the goal is to increase the sharing of the intellectual property, okay? So you can copy and distribute it without having to contact the creator, okay? And then you have this, right? So in this spirit of being, creative and whatnot, it just seems like the right thing to do in terms of attribution, right? You do something, you could remix it or whatever. I don't think it's that big of a deal just to give credit to the original author. So I think that's one key point here, which is highlighted in red. Okay. Now the other point here is like in this spirit of sharing and whatever, it's more from a creator standpoint. So you probably don't want to have people trying to make money off of it, trying to sell it, and stuff like that. Once you get into like sales, then it seems only fair to, discuss with the original author and work out something there. So I think that's another fair point. Okay. And then the derivative work is the same thing as what I discussed before, right? So like just picture like this character or whatever, and then you did everything 99%, then you just make some tweaks here and there. So maybe the author didn't want you to do that. Whoever created that character doesn't like what you did to it. So as long as you keep the original product the way the author intended it, then that's good, right? So that's what they want. So that's another fair point there. Okay. So then the other point here is like if you do create a derivative work, that you also use the same type of licensing. Okay, so if somehow you work out an agreement to create the derivative work, then you can't just go ahead and like lock it down and just say, okay, now I'm going to create like this license for profit. And it's basically a proprietary license. You're going to still derive this Creative Commons license. So it keeps the spirit of things there. So those are the four main concepts that you care about with the Creative Commons license. it's been highlighted here in red. So make sure you do that or keep a copy of it for your notes or whatever. These are points that are going to be probably in your exam in some shape or form. So make sure you know these points about what a Creative Commons license means. Right, and copyright is the same thing, right? That's a commercial company, right? So it's, you know, they kind of give you some leeway if it's a nonprofit, right? Of course, you have to ask for permission, right? And of course, you have to give credit to the owner, right? This one, I'm not really sure I've seen too much of that, right? In general, like, I think you're best off to make sure that you ask for permission, okay? It gets like a little bit hazy if you start to kind of like make some interpretation of like when you can use something without permission, right? If something is clearly copyrighted, you know, just do the right thing and check with the owner, okay? And then this important thing, right? This will probably be an exam question. What cannot be copyrighted? Okay. Well, facts are facts, right? You can't copyright that, right? Opinions, new ideas, and old ideas. So I guess essentially any idea, right? So that is debatable, right? So I think you might have seen in the past where there was like, you know, different lawsuits from, you know, different companies, namely like Apple or whatever, you know, having lawsuit about other people copying their look and feel in terms of their user interface and stuff like that. So again, it's one of those things that goes to court, gets debated or whatever. So whether that's something that's an idea or not, you know, that's up for debate. Okay. And then it kind of puts that out there. What is intellectual property then? So yeah, you know, sometimes it's a little bit hazy, right? And it, like I said, it's up for debate. You know, some stuff is pretty clear cut that is intellectual property. And then some other stuff, you know, that's what companies go to court for in terms of intellectual property. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop it here, and then there'll be more lectures coming up for chapter 12 with privacy and security. Okay. Thank you.